limit all new annexations?
I'll believe it when it comes to pass.
I can't imagine they want to give up that power. That's an option. They can just put the warning out there, and I mean, you know, they're taking away some of their power, going, well, we're not even going to look at it. Well, that's not right. There might be opportunity knocking, but you know me, I'm thinking of Bossier. We don't do things quite like Shreveport does.
No comment.
How is this different from what they did like a year ago, where they stopped annexations?
Well, I'm assuming that if they don't want to annex into Shreveport, Bossier will look at them real hard. If they can be a addition, we'll consider it. There's some riverfront property that's been in question since the 1800s. I think we can get all that resolved through this.
And here comes our moderator. Hello, John. Are you with us?
Yes, I am. Sorry for being late.
That's okay. We're good.
How's everybody?
So far, so good, but this hadn't started yet.
Yeah.
It sounds like Larry.
I was hoping that Aaron and Jerry would make it, but we'll just.
Gary's on here.
Hi.
Oh, I thought, never mind. My bad.
Okay. Let's kind of mute it down. And John, you
Yeah.
Clay Walker up in the corner, or at least he is on mine. Let's get started.
Okie dokie. Hi, Clay.
Hey, how are you, John?
I'm doing well. Thank you. It's good to
Glad
see
to
you.
hear it.
Thank you. So I have been hearing about you running for office. Pretty prestigious office, as a matter of fact, a very vital office. And you've been in the juvenile detention business for quite some time. I remember the intimacy of conversation you and I have had over the years with the instituting of a plan or a program committee, however they want to put it, the Transformational Next Committee.
Yes, ma'am.
And its endeavors that it was supposed to have addressed for some issues that we were still dealing with that seemingly have not eradicated themselves as much.
Is truly, in my judgment, the person for the moment, because he can bring us together.
Somebody talking?
Whoever's got their, I'm going to mute people.
The White House, and he will do that.
Larry, is that you?
Yeah, that's Larry. So, and I know, Clay, that you've been very instrumental in trying to get programs and things and in place whereby we can actually help children more than house children from one setting to another that does not have anything of worth in its end. What is it about you that would want me to support you as a juvenile justice judge? I mean, a juvenile judge, I'm sorry.
Well, let me say, you know, the bottom line is I have been doing it 21 years now. And the point of what we're trying to do here, or what we've been trying to do in the last 20 years, is really find the underlying problem in the kid's life so that we can solve that and have them not come back. I mean, if we're just addressing behavior, we're not solving the problem that's behind it. And let me see if I can explain that a little bit. 21 years ago, I got appointed. I was a private attorney here in town, minding my own business, and I got appointed on a juvenile case. This was back when it was Judge Andy Gallagher and Claville. Anyway, it's a young man. He's a 10th grader in Caddo schools. He's been arrested 5 times. Because it's his 5th time in progressive discipline, he's now about to go to jail for a year, which, as a relatively important aside, is $125,000 of taxpayer money. He's going to jail for a year, and I got appointed on the case and asked to look into it. And long story short, he can't read. So the school system is saying that he's a bully, that he's a terror, he's beating up kids, he's causing all sorts of trouble. What I find out is that he can't read, and what happens is when it's his turn to read out loud, he starts to stumble through it and fumble through it. The first boy to laugh at him, he goes over the desk and they're fighting. And so in that kind of a case, the point is, you do have to address the fighting. I mean, we're still going to tell him it's never okay to punch another kid in the face, but what you really got to address is the fact that he can't read. And so it was 21 years ago. I am sitting in his living room in Queensboro, and I come to realize his mom can't read. And so, again, kind of long story short, get her into remedial reading class, get him into remedial reading class, go back to the judge to convince him not to send him to jail for a year, and he doesn't get rearrested. And so it's fixing that underlying problem. And for whatever reason, I was a private attorney and I enjoyed my work, but when I got appointed on that case, I don't know how else to explain it, but it spoke to me in terms of fixing problems. And too much of the legal system, I'm not sure everybody on here, I'm not trying to step on any toes, but too much of the legal system comes down to money and really doesn't come down necessarily to solving problems or justice. When I got into juvenile, what I realized was there is no money in juvenile. All it is about is solving problems and justice. And it really spoke to me. And so I literally wrote the judge a letter, and I appreciated his appointment and asked for more and started doing more juvenile work. It's 21 years later. I've now been running juvenile court for 10 years. And what I can tell you is that about 80%, I know y'all are having conversations, and feel free to interrupt and ask any questions, because what I'm trying to get to is juvenile crime in Shreveport. How do we make Shreveport safer? About 80% of the cases we deal with here are just like that client that I had. I call them low risk, high need. You're talking about mental health problems, drug use in the home, domestic violence in the home. The kid has been abused or neglected. High need issues. That kid couldn't read, but he wasn't necessarily a very high risk for serious crime in the community. It's about 80% of what we do. And I don't mean to discount it. It takes a lot of work. You got to build relationships with that family, trust with that family, convince the mom to get into remedial reading, try to get her a better job. You're trying to work on poverty issues. You're trying to work on, like I said, domestic violence issues. But that 80% of kids, it's actually 81%, don't come back. We solve that underlying problem and they don't come back. 20%, 19% literally, come back constantly, come back all the time. That is juvenile crime in Shreveport, is about 20% of the kids that we see. And where I am in my thinking now, 20 years into this, I'm very concerned that for those children, we are too late. The abuse, neglect, lack of, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm judging the parents, because you're talking about a cycle and a history of poverty and lack of role modeling for parenting, but we are too late. They're 15 years old.
So may I interject, please?
Yes, absolutely.
If you feel that we are too late in doing what we haven't done, because it seems like we haven't done what we could do. We've not given due diligence or true due diligence to changing these children's lives, except mental health agencies talking to them and whatever. How is it? I remember some years ago, I did a jump on the bus. Isn't that what they used to call it, jump on the bus?
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, and we were over at Fair Park, and I believe it was Mr. Daigle at the time that was the principal, and he met with a young lady who had a headdress on her head, and he asked her to remove her headdress. And I remember you saying, I wonder what she's going to do, because he told her to take that off. Is she going to react in a negative way? Or how would she respond? Well, she responded differently than than probably many would have thought she would have. She went on to do what Mr. Daigle asked to do. When it is, to me, because the masses of children that are housed in juvenile detention look like me, as far as skin color. And seemingly that that trap is always there. There's never a rising above what has trapped us in our mentality, our mindsets. And I don't give that to anyone other than those of us who may have been instrumental in helping it along. And I say all of that to say this. I don't need to know that here's a man who has had intimate knowledge of what children have dealt with, but also retains still today what children are dealing with, and yet we've done very little. And I'm not saying you particularly, Clay, because it's not just you that makes up the juvenile system. It is a conglomerate of persons. The school system failed a young man. How can you get to the 10th grade and can't read? God only knows. But he did do it. He was able to get through it. And someone should have seen those shortcomings. And where we will go back to the homes, indeed we should. We still got to go back to the schools too. Because that child, the one you just shared with us, went from 1st to 10th grade, not possessing the ability to do one of the 3 essentials, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And yes, we knew, or they knew, or somebody should have known that. Why is it that every time we ask him to read, he goes out into this tangent or whatever, and no one cared enough to do anything? Though he went through that system time and time again, and though you found out his mom couldn't read, what did the community do? I mean, you can't fight for me if I'm not willing to fight for me. You can do the best you can for me, but at the end of the day, what lies for me to be the best for me is me.
Clay, what do you think?
So, the bottom line of what we're dealing with, like when I say I think we're with this 20% that I'm concerned we're too late, to get to John's point, for that 20%, I think the answer really is prevention. What we have done over the 21 years, and this is how I met John Guynfort, is that we have created a network. It's a Medicaid-funded system to respond to those underlying needs. So if you find out it's mental health, if it's domestic violence in the home, if it's drug use in the home, when you find out what that underlying problem is, you make a referral to the wraparound system. That's working relatively well for juvenile justice. The problem is for those 20%, it's too late. It's like we have a fantastic cancer treatment center, but we're only accepting stage 4 cancer. We know the child is being neglected or abused or has, and as John pointed out, in the 2nd grade and then the 3rd grade, they knew he couldn't read. What we're trying to do now is get that same response system, that same wraparound services system, and better connect it to the school system to prevent. Because if we know the kid is having explosive anger problems because there's domestic violence in the home, and that's in the 2nd grade, if the school system can identify that and refer it to the wraparound system in the 2nd grade, rather than waiting till he's 15 and coming to see me, we have a better chance at it. What we've done over the 20 years, when I started this, 1,159 children came to Caddo Juvenile Detention. Last year, 368 children came to Caddo Juvenile Detention. What we've done over the 20 years is to say, we don't need to use juvenile detention for something like a school fight. 2 boys that square off, both, agreeing to fight, essentially. It's not good, it's inappropriate, the school system needs to deal with it. But we recognize they're not actually made better by coming to juvenile detention. There's 2 things that actually happen. First of all, they're not prosecuted for literally 6 months. 6 months later, the impact of what we do at the court is lost. But the 2 kids then come to juvenile detention. If they're housed with kids that are committing armed robbery, while we're trying to teach them a lesson not to fight, they're learning lessons about armed robbery. So we recognized over the decades that we don't need to be bringing in all of these children into juvenile detention. So we've gone from 1,159 to 368. Now that we're down to the 368, we are focused better on this 20%. The 20% of kids that reoffend are now the ones that we're kind of narrowed down to 368 that are coming in. And while we're able to do some good things with them, like I say, I think the best answer now is prevention. It's getting in the school system. It's doing what Jon is talking about, is creating a network to be more responsive to teachers when they make the referral for a kid in the 1st and 2nd grade. It's not to overburden the teachers. It's not to put more on their plate. But there are people like John Glover. There are programs like the Center for Children and Families. There are programs around town where you can make the referrals when they're 1st and 2nd graders, and it's more effective. And then possibly, I mean, I would like to see in the next 20 years, can we reduce that 20% of reoffenders to about 10%? Can we cut it in half? That's juvenile crime in Shreveport, and I think that's what it's going to take to make Shreveport safer.
Now,
I have a question.
All right.
Using the numbers you just gave us, 20% meant last year you had 75 kids who were that 19-20%. Is that accurate?
So it's actually a little higher than that. The 20% is not out of the children that come to detention. It's out of the entire system. So the 368 that come to juvenile detention is not all juvenile crime. It's really the more serious crime. Misdemeanors, for example, we created in about 2006, we created what's called the Misdemeanor Referral Center. So if you get picked up for shoplifting at Walmart, you don't come to detention. You go to the Misdemeanor Referral Center. You got to be picked up by your parents. You can still be prosecuted. You still may get on probation, but you don't come to detention. So the 80% is out of the total number involved in juvenile court. 368 is really going to be more of your felonies and to some extent violent felonies.
What was the total number last year?
You're literally talking about, on a year-to-year basis, roughly 120 to maybe 150 kids that are the repeat offenders.
Okay. What is the total number that are the misdemeanor, the total number in the system?
So it depends on, I mean, it's been on changes each year, but the bottom line is last year was 1,540 that were arrested.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily
include the shoplifting.
It includes everybody, right? Just to and here's,
Mr. Walker.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Bob Brown. I want to ask you, based on what you just told us about the juvenile, the situation where they get picked up by their parents.
Yes.
I've heard from more than one SPD officer that we're not even going to bother to arrest them unless they're doing, if it's a property crime, we're obviously not going to arrest them, but unless they're harming an individual, you know, it's a crime against a person, we're not even going to arrest them because it's just a revolving door, and they're going to be picked up by their parents in an hour, and my time is being wasted from the officer's point of view. What's your position on that?
It's a tough situation because there's a lot of truth to what they're talking about. And here's the problem. Caddo's Juvenile Detention Center has 24 beds. There's 64,000 children in the parish, and we have 24 beds. So when an officer picks up a kid, you know, if they pick them up on burglary or any kind of violent crime, they're generally those kids are coming to juvenile detention, and we are doing our best to have a bed available to hold those kids. A kid on a school fight or a petty theft or a shoplifting, we're not going to be able to have a bed for that kid because we're trying to keep them for the burglary kids. So the frustration of the officers is that you pick up a kid for shoplifting, you bring him to the Misdemeanor Referral Center to be picked up by their parents, and you know, it depends on what happens to them. If their parents are not holding them accountable, the accountability doesn't happen until the DA's office prosecutes, and like I say, it may be several months later. That's their frustration, which I understand.
Does that spill over? Does that spill over to the juvenile court in the fact that, because I sat in, Jerry Bowman had a juvenile justice forum that he allowed me to sit in one time. You were there, I believe.
I remember it.
Yeah. Do they leave the bed? I mean, the beds are you? How often are you at full occupancy?
So on a regular basis, it depends on the months. Normally, and this is non-COVID, normal months, about 6 months out of the year, we're running at capacity. So September and October, again in March, April, May, those are our high months. We're going to be literally at 23, 24. Like today, we're at 23. That's really more because of COVID, but we are near capacity.
Does that cause that fact right there that you're so close to capacity? Does that cause you, the justice system to raise their or broaden their parameters? In other words, we may not at one time bring you to detention center for a bicycle theft or a fight, but now that we're at full, we're going to cut you loose even if it's a burglary.
Hi, if I could interject something here with respect to these questions, and maybe this adds some perspective. It's hard for me to gauge this now. About 10, maybe 12 or so, maybe a little longer years ago, there was a lot of attention in Louisiana on juvenile justice system reform. And part of that, major foundations like Annie Casey and MacArthur Foundation came into Louisiana was on some stats indicating that Louisiana was removing more kids from their home in the juvenile justice system and incarcerating more kids than just about any other state in the nation. So the spotlight was kind of on us to bring about some reform to change that and to take a look at what are the characteristics of those kids who need out-of-home placement, who need a higher level of supervision versus those kids who don't. And I think in many respects what that led us to is this 80-20 dichotomy where we have 20% of the kids in the juvenile justice system chewing up 80 to 90% of the dollars. And so what about that other 80%, and do they really need those higher level, more restrictive types of care? So maybe that adds some perspective to what's part of what drove this, and if you could speak on that.
Well, and to some extent, bringing back in Bob's question, because I think it's the relationship with the police department is really important. Annie Casey, when they came in, it's called the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. And what they really taught us, this is probably 15 years ago, John, what they taught us was to track the data. So 100 kids come in on a school fight, put 100 kids in detention, give them 2 or 3 nights in detention, and then let them out and see what happens next. See if it had an impact on them. And when you look at the data, as frustrating as it is to the police, we actually have better outcomes when you use, for example, in this example, the school fight diversion program. School fight diversion, this is the DA, Willis Knighton, a lot of different groups that get together and the school system, obviously, and create the school fight diversion program. 2 boys that get into a fight, they're both looking to fight, 1 or 2 licks and somebody breaks it up and it's not that big a deal. The principal has the authority. It's not the system or the police. The school principal has the authority. Do I arrest that kid and send them to juvenile justice, or do they go to the school fight diversion? When they send those kids to school fight diversion, it's the very next day. So rather than being prosecuted 6 months later, the very next day they go to another school. They go through a program. It's a 3-day program for school fight. On the last day, their parents have to come. So there's some accountability for the parents. In that program, 94% of those kids don't have another school fight that year. Coming to juvenile detention, and then 2 or 3 days they get out, and now they're going to be prosecuted 6 months later. The outcomes were not nearly as good. And so that's the bottom line, is you're dealing with, on the one hand, Bob's point, and it's real. The officers are frustrated. I got a 15-year-old who's cussing me in the squad car and is disrespectful and all this, because he gets in this fight at school. If I take him to detention, they're just going to let him out. If I take him to misdemeanor referral center, it doesn't seem like anything happens. But when he goes to the school fight diversion program, it's far more effective. Those are the kinds of programs we have been developing to try to turn these kids around. And one more detail on that. Last year, 819 kids in Caddo Parish went to the school fight diversion program. That 819 kids, they're not taking up police time. You're not appointing a public defender or a DA. You're not appointing probation or taking up the judge in court time. It's I can't even, I mean, it's millions of dollars. We tried to do a calculation on it once, and it was like over $4 million that 800, if they had to be fully prosecuted. The school system pays $50,000 for that program. So saving money and taking 819 kids out of the juvenile justice system then allows us to focus on the burglary kids. Because that's where I am worried about Bob's question. Burglary to me is more serious than it's sometimes being taken. That's what I want to focus on. You break into a car or certainly a house, that should be coming to detention, and we should be doing the most we can to try to address that. Because unfortunately, the other reality is the biggest reason kids are breaking into cars is because they're looking for guns. In the fall of 2015, and this started happening all over the state because I talked to my counterparts all over the state, kids started to learn that people leave guns in glove boxes and under the seat. So they're breaking mostly into unlocked cars. They're walking around checking door handles because they're going to be unlocked and there's still a gun in the car. They're then getting that gun and they're selling it. We are tracking social media for hundreds of children where they're trying to sell guns because they just stole them out of cars. That is very serious. That's why we're hearing so many gunshots around town. And we definitely want to take that more seriously. But that's part of the disconnect because I'm not sure the police, well, like I say, I mean, like Bob said, they feel like it's a revolving door. I can assure you it's not a revolving door for burglary.
What is your position on those handguns? I mean, I hear the same thing. I'm a rent man, and I talk to SPD officers, and they tell me that the juveniles are becoming more and more aggressive and just more street wise, I guess, for lack of a better term. And how you've been in this system 10 years? How are you going to address this escalating problem with juveniles and gun possession?
Incarcerate them.
So, it's a little of both, John. I mean, the bottom line is, to be honest, I mean, if you're dealing with a gun, I do put that on a different list. That is where we are using incarceration more. And I'll say this, detention to try to change a kid's behavior is one thing. Detention for public safety is another. When a kid has a gun, I'm not necessarily using detention to change his behavior. I still am doing other things to try to change his behavior. I'm using detention for a kid with a gun because that's a direct public safety threat. And where I stand on the gun situation is, we've been doing this now for about 18 months. We formed a committee. It has got the DA's office, SPD, Sheriff's Department, juvenile detention, juvenile probation, and the shelter over in Bossier. It's basically everybody that works in juvenile crime. And we are trying to focus on that problem singularly. It actually started about school shootings and school threats. So that's still a part of what we do. But primarily right now, what we're doing is we are focusing on those burglaries and those kids. We're literally, so we've got part of the task force is looking at the social media where they're posting these guns and pictures, or we're getting together with SPD and the Sheriff's Department to focus on, we've got some, I mean, I don't want to call them gangs, but they are. They're not gangs like you would think of in the 90s, but there are street gangs now that are involved with these gun sales. And so we are focusing on those numbers. Thankfully, it's not a huge number in Caddo for children. The majority of the shootings and murders that you're hearing are not juveniles. They're a little older than that. They're going to be literally 19 to 30. But still too many are juveniles. And so that what we're doing is we're focusing with that task force so that when we start to put together cases on those kids that are more serious, I don't want to say they're fast tracked in the system, but they're just in a different stack where we're taking it more seriously.
So can I say that, how many juvenile judges are there?
There are 3 juvenile judges in Caddo. David Matlock does solely abuse and neglect, what we call children in need of care. He's doing all child protection. There are 2 judges, Casey Jones and Paul Young, that do delinquency and FINS, Family Need of Services.
Family Need of Services, yeah.
Family, yeah, that's truancy, runaway, ungovernable.
Yeah. Okay,
so 2 judges doing delinquency.
So out of these 2 judges and with what they have, what you're speaking to today would be something totally new as a judge?
No, it's not totally new. This is something, like I say, that juvenile probation and detention have been doing for about 18 months with the DA's office to try to focus on that particular problem, which is car burglary, which is related to the gangs that we do have, which is related to gun sales and now gun violence.
So Matlock, Young, and Jones have not dealt with any of these situations that you're speaking to today?
No, ma'am. No, I'm trying to say for 18 months, Young and Casey Jones have absolutely been dealing with it. Matlock has been in, what's that?
With the delinquency side.
Correct.
Okay. And the reason I'm questioning, because I'm looking at your history. You say you've been in the system prior to being a lawyer, but you've been in the system for 21 years.
Yes.
And in 21 years, you have seen an ever evolving of disciplines and behaviors and everything. And I'm finding it somewhat perplexing that no one has actually had these kinds of issues addressed before. Today you're sharing with us here in this venue. And I'm talking about the burglary and all that you've mentioned. You've mentioned quite a few things since we've sat here. The different programs that you have available, like the Misdemeanor Referral Center, and from one situation to the next. There is talk in the wind, in the air, that they're talking about having a regional facility probably located in Bossier, because there's land there that will be able to be utilized. I don't know that I would really want a child from Caddo to go to Bossier and to be governed, because, I'm apprehensive about how we're dealing with. I'm just trying to figure out, how is it that the predominance of your clientele is Black children? The predominance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the predominance.
It is.
Predominance of your children.
Wait a minute, John. What we're also seeing in the last 18 months is 12 and 13-year-olds stealing cars.
And I'm not going to
new phenomenon.
But I'm not going to deny or denounce or diminish what we're sharing here. What I'm saying is that I'm having a problem here all these years later, all these decades later, because all of this was evolving to where we are now. And I cannot believe, and maybe I'm just being naive, that there has not been anything in place of concrete that can show even communities where maybe you're complicit in, not you all, I'm talking about the communities themselves, are complicit in what we're seeing in our communities. Because
John, that's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the prevention. When I say the 20% and we're too late, what's happening is that each year you're getting, as Marion points out, you're getting 12 and 13-year-olds coming up into the system. Caddo still has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. So it's not that but the point is that we're not, it's not that we're not addressing it. We've got 18, 17, 16-year-olds that are at Swanson. They're in our juvenile prison because they stole guns and were doing all these burglaries. It's just that each year, when you've got 36% of the children in Caddo Parish live in poverty, each year you get a new round of kids coming up through the system that have been neglected, abused, education neglect, what have you. For the 10 years that I practiced in juvenile court, 11 years that I was a defense attorney, I dealt with 2 biological fathers. That system is still continuing to kind of spit out new kids every year that are breaking into cars. We are addressing them. The police, I promise you, are doing their best to find them and arrest them. But as the system processes them, as the system puts them in group homes and then incarceration, each year you have a new 12-year-old coming up into that system. That's why I say we need to get into the school system to prevent it, because I think when you have 36% poverty, we're going to keep digging this hole. I mean, I'll retire and we'll still be doing it. That's why we got to get upstream and try to do more prevention.
John, I work with law enforcement officers who throw up their hands that they've taken the same 12-year-old on his bicycle multiple times and nothing works. They have no home. They have no family life. They have no church. Times are different.
Well, at least you're giving me something to look to and to really bring to a lot of minds and hearts that maybe we've just turned a deaf ear to, because what I'm seeing is very disturbing to me. We've always been, as far as I'm concerned, on the
Well, excuse me, I did
I
that.
can hear you, John.
Oh, do I need to repeat?
No.
Oh, okay. And seemingly we stay on the short end of the stick, not recognizing our contribution to why we remain on the short end of the stick. Right now, our children are in a precarious situation, pre-adolescent, adolescent, teenager, and even to young teenager who is, well, older teenager who is about to be that 21-year-old or that 20-year-old. And if we're not changing the dynamics of what keeps us bound, then our bondage will forever be. I just don't know how effective, because I'm not seeing any effectiveness right now. All I'm hearing is time and time again conversations. But you know that I was saying, practice what you preach. Seemingly that is being missed. You know, yes, we send them and they are going to see mental health agent providers and stuff, but undoubtedly something is missing even in that equation. Now, I may be wrong, but that seems to be something here is sitting at the nucleus of why we cannot come away from the bondage. Why is it that we have to remain in bondage? And granted, we know that the homes are not the way the homes were when I grew up. I understand that they're very, very dysfunctional, you know, where it was when I was growing up, you had to be married before you had a child. You don't, you know, society say you didn't have to do that anymore. And I think, you know, when we buy into society, we have to be careful what we buy into, because society is not always meant to make it better. It's just meant to keep it going. And I think we've gotten trapped in the keeping it going side of the deal. We just got to come up with some solutions. And I'm not talking about you all, Clay. I'm talking about those of us that are in these communities that are seeing the devastation that's coming before us. Because it hurts my heart that we're in the 21st century and we're still battling what we were battling back in the 60s and 70s. It's just been dressed up. Thank God it came from a small town where I didn't have to see all that I'm seeing here in this city. It's just disheartening for me. It is. And I got grandchildren here, and I definitely don't want to go down this path.
The work, I mean, I can agree with you. I understand. I mean, it can be depressing and it can be demoralizing, but the reason I stay optimistic, I mean, I think there are several things that are going in the right direction. I know you're frustrated with the school system, But the school system, from my point of view, is better under Dr. Goree.
No.
I know you got your problems with them. I know we've talked about it many times, but I find them to be at least in a better position right now, because they're acknowledging that there is a problem and they're asking for community help. When I first started this work 15, 20 years ago, they were not asking for help, and they didn't want you to see records, and they were not as open about working with kids in the school. Since Goree, he's allowed us to work more in the school system. So the idea of saying this is kind of the full spectrum of a child's life. We need more good 0 to 3 daycare centers. We need more access to pre-K. We need better, if you look, I mean, the thing that can be very depressing, something like 61% of the children in Caddo Parish were not kindergarten ready last year. We've got to have better kindergarten readiness to give the schools a fighting chance. If the schools are then trained to identify some of this trauma and abuse and make that referral to wraparound when the children are younger and prevent them from coming to see me when they're 15, that's where I'm staying optimistic. We have, in the 20 years I've been doing this, to go from 1,159 kids to 368 is a lot of children. And the phrase you used about bondage, that's a lot of children that are not in prison now that didn't need to be. It allows us then, in terms of our caseloads, to focus on the ones that are causing more trouble. And we're doing the best we can with that. We're working with the police and with the sheriff's department, doing our best. But I'm also seeing that what we have to do to be more effective is get upstream and prevent it.
And I want you to know, Clay, that I'm not dispelling anything that you're saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying that you're not the savior for me. Dr. Goree isn't even the savior for me, because again, a lot of things that our children are missing, they have missed from the beginning of their lives, and that is parental involvement. At the end of the day, I still anticipate and expect us not to be saying we still have a ways to go in 2020. Because I'm trying to figure out where we're going. We're forever going and never arriving. We can continue to put in a program after program, but if we don't address why that sore keeps coming back, like you said, the inabilities to recognize that we may be complicit in a lot of what you're having to deal with. We don't take that responsibility because maybe our leadership does not give us that responsibility. Or maybe they don't want us to see how we can be different. But at the end of the equation still lies and stands me. I stand saying that now you have brought to the attention of me, and even though I worked in attendance at Caddo Parish School Board, and I saw the things that a lot of parents were dealing with, that it was so easy to say, it's your fault. But after you sit and you listen, no, it's not always your fault. It's that your child may be that challenging child, and you may be doing the best you can to take care of that child. But when you have no one listening because politics are ever present, then it diminishes your ability to get it done. I mean, I have seen from every spectrum, because I have 4 children, and my husband and I raised them in accordance to how we were raised, which was with discipline, but we gave them a foundation of knowing right from wrong, and we stayed there and we walked that walk with them. We didn't put them out there and just did not. But at the end of the day, even as my children are adults, they get to choose their choices. But I don't ever want to see a child at 12 and 13 having to choose, do I burglarize or not? I don't want to hear that. And I definitely don't want, and though you give Dr. Goree his accolades, and he may be worthy of those in some aspects, but when I got 30 plus schools that house people that look like me, that are being destroyed because these children are still in D and F schools, and no matter how LDO even makes up that scale, and no matter the components that gives that SPS score, you're still showing me that there's a problem here.
It's a manufactured problem, though. It's not a real problem. That is a manufactured. I mean, I'm not saying every kid is being educated equally, but those school performance scores are designed to give you the exact impression that you have.
But see, again, Billy, and thank you for your comments. When you're on my side of the table, when I'm looking at the masses of children that look like me, that I walked into a classroom one day and I had a conversation with a kindergartner who had been in school for 8 weeks, who still could not recognize or even write his name. I had a problem, not just with the home, but with the people in the classroom, because again, Clay, that child you said that was in the 10th grade that couldn't read, somebody saw this and did nothing. How many of those children are being neglected because we don't want to do just that one step further to really assess and find out?
So John, let me make a comment here, and Clay, God knows you and I have talked about this many times over the years, but as a clinician, one of my grave frustrations is, and going back to the issue of early intervention, I agree in large part that if we're going to change the curve here, we've got to intervene early. And certainly, John, it means paying attention to and addressing some of those issues that you're talking about in terms of what's going on in the community and how are we reinforcing this in some ways. But I just want to make this point. And it doesn't matter whether I'm talking about a child that's in kindergarten, first grade, third grade, sixth grade, or the ninth grade. If I have a client in my caseload that is failing to thrive in school because he's an exceptional student and he's just bored to tears in the classroom, that child under the Individuals with Disability Education Act qualifies for special education services. When I help the parents write a letter requesting a special education evaluation, which is a prerequisite to getting that child into advanced studies, I get that special education evaluation literally within 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. I mean, it happens just like that. But if I've got a child who has behavior problems, he's got psychiatric problems, he's got emotional problems that are manifesting, those problems are manifested by disruptive behavior in the classroom, and I help the parents write a letter requesting a special education evaluation, I might get it a year later if I get it at all. I just can't get those evaluations done to get those kids qualified for special ed. And I'm perplexed about that. I just wonder, why is that the case? I think some of the answer has to go back to what's going on with high stakes testing in the school. And once that child is identified, the school loses the capacity to unilaterally suspend and expel that child. Once they're involved in special ed, John, as you know, there's a whole due process that they have to go through, and it's very hard to say the child doesn't have a disability when it's clear that the disability is resulting in the behavior in the classroom. So it's an uphill climb for the school. I understand all of those competing factors. I don't know how we overcome that. I am frustrated as a clinician. I have fought locally. I have fought in the legislature to turn that around, and it just doesn't seem that anything works. And it brought me to this point and back to this conversation of writing reports to the juvenile court and saying in that evaluation that a large reason that this child is in this court today is because the special services that they were entitled to under the law didn't happen. Now, I don't know, and my question is, how do we address that? How do we make that change through the court, through social initiative? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I'm very frustrated with that.
So,
I think
go ahead.
I was going to say, to speak to that, and John, I know you and I have a long history with that, with the special ed trouble. I think, and this is kind of an unsatisfying answer, I think the answer is because human beings are involved. I think it's because when a child is 6 years old and they come into school and they're not kindergarten ready in kindergarten, and they're still behind when they're in first grade, and there's abuse and neglect or substance abuse in the home or whatever else is going on in terms of trauma, when the teacher goes to try to address the problems with that student, too often it's not a good interaction with the parent. And at some point, the school system gets exhausted trying to help that child, and they throw up their hands. And kids get socially promoted, and kids just pass along to the next teacher, and they get frustrated by it. But it's literally just those individual choices. And John, I mean, you and I have worked on, it's got to be 100 of those cases. And what it boils down to is when the kid is cussing and fighting in school, you stop seeing him as a 5-year-old that was neglected, and you start seeing him as an angry, mean kid. And that's part of the switch you've got to make, is you've got to get the school system. I think if they can make referrals when the kid is younger, when they still have some hope for that kid, it will be more effective. When he's been socially promoted for 5 years, you've just got a momentum of throwing up your hands with that kid.
Well, Clay, what do you think about mandatory pre-K?
I would like to have mandatory pre-K. I'm concerned about the idea of universal, to some extent, in terms of the cost of it, in terms of choice for parents, that sort of thing. But if I had to say, I mean, for the problems that I have with 36% of kids in poverty, I think I would benefit from universal pre-K. I think I would benefit from, we've got a child care assistance program in Louisiana where you can, if I'm a single mother of 4 and it costs too much money to put my kids in daycare, so I stay home instead of working, child care assistance can help give you vouchers so the kids can go to daycare and mom can work. I would like to see more of that. I need the role model of working, and I'd like to have the kids in those daycares. That, to me, the evolution of my thinking is that it's those younger ages. What John and I were talking about a few days ago, 90% of the brain is developed by the age of 5. If there's serious neglect or trauma in those first 5 years, you're already too late when the kid is showing up kindergarten, first grade.
Right.
So I'm, to me, and, we're seeing it now, unfortunately, with kids out of school. 0 to 5, when they're not in any kind of safety net in the community, kids are showing up with severe abuse and neglect that we didn't know about for those first 5 years because they're not on a radar screen. If we had daycare, if we had universal pre-K, I think you'd catch more of that, and we would do better with the kindergarten readiness. I think it's a huge point, that John was talking about. The kid shows up 3-year-old ready to kindergarten, and they progress 1 year each year. That's really all you can ask of a school system, is to progress each kid 1 year each year. They're now in the 8th grade, but they're testing on a 6th grade level. That's why their school performance score is an F, because they're taking an 8th grade test and they're 6th grade ready. That comes back to the home in those first 5 years more than it does the school system.
Well,
you had mentioned earlier about the child that you had a personal experience with the mother or the parent themselves couldn't read. If that's a problem, that's probably, I don't know if it is, but it wouldn't be hard to assume that it's bigger than just that individual. Then it would almost be so beneficial that you let the school system teach them those letters when they're 4 years old, before they, and because if you're saying that illiteracy is such a vital part of, or integral part of, this whole equation, don't you think?
I do. I mean, I think the bottom line is that we do see a fair number of children, and John Ford may have a sense of the number as well. I mean, we've now got about 38,000 children in the school system. Those coming into kindergarten and those that are not kindergarten ready, those numbers, essentially you're talking about education neglect of 0 to 5-year-olds. I mean, I don't know how else to put it.
You know what? Used to be well, when I, and I'm gonna go back from my inception because we didn't have kindergarten. But then even when kindergarten came, with my children's sake, they were taught. Now we reaffirmed what was taught in the classroom. We made sure that they had structure. We made sure that they were doing what they needed to do. But if it is that I need to teach the child before I give you the child, why do I need you to teach the child at all?
So that's not the perception right now, and this is a huge generalization. But there's a part of the community that they don't believe it's their job to teach the child 0 to 5. Their job is to get them to kindergarten, and now that's your job as the school.
But how have you made that assessment? How have you made that assessment that it is that there are those who think that they have no responsibility from 0 to 5 to make sure that their children are ready to walk in that door, not even academically, but walk in that door where they will be such that they can sit down and learn what they need to learn? What did you use to gain that perspective?
So it's two or three things that I've seen that. One is personally, literally having a parent screaming at me, cussing me about that is not her job. I've heard it from school teacher friends, principal friends in the school system, that is the perception of some of the parents coming into the school system.
May I ask another question?
And then I just want to say one last thing. I mean, there are certain schools, we got one school in Caddo Parish, 91% of the kindergarten class was not kindergarten ready. So that's a problem in certain parts of the community. And I'm not trying to sound blaming about this, because what you're talking about is poverty. So if I live in poverty and I've got children in my home, my priority is shelter. It's not being evicted. It's food. It's safety. What the single mother is dealing with in those situations, frankly, simply takes precedence over the education of that child. I've got dozens, I mean, it feels like hundreds over the years. It's children that are being raised by 8-year-old brothers and sisters, 7-year-old brothers and sisters. The lack of supervision and the lack of education in those young years is devastating. That's why I say, I mean, I think this prevention is probably the most important thing that we need to be working on in Caddo. It will take up, whoever the judge is, it's going to take up a tremendous amount of their time working with the 80% of kids that we can turn around. But it's a community effort. When you got to look at things like Ford and the Community Foundation, all the different agencies. They just did a summit on early childhood in the fall before COVID. That's the kind of work that has to happen as a community to reach out to the 0 to 5 parents, offer child care assistance funding, offer pre-K, anything that will help to try to get that child kindergarten ready.
How is Dr. Goree to this idea of the pre-K?
As far as I know, I mean, I never want to speak for him, but I mean, I've heard him say several times, absolutely on board. We held so there's a thing called the Early Childhood Policy Leadership Institute. It's kind of a stupidly long name, but it's a legislative part of the legislature in Louisiana that's focusing on early childhood. And they bring judges and senators and representatives and principals and community leaders and police chiefs. They try to bring everybody to Baton Rouge, and they're studying early childhood, basically. Laura Alderman with Step Forward and I were invited. What's that? Oh, well, anyway, Laura Alderman and I were invited to do that several years ago. And we recognized the benefit of it. So what we did was we kind of created one of our own here. In the fall, we had about 70 people do a 3 separate days. It was 3 different Fridays in the fall that they came and learned from national experts about early childhood. The police chief, the mayor, all sorts of different leaders, Caddo Parish Commission, school board members, everybody, they're all on board with the idea of how do we deliver better 0 to 5, really 2 things, education and safety, because the abuse and neglect is pretty intense.
Let me ask a question. how many parents have you all brought into those settings that you all are discussing to help them to gain a perspective, a better perspective of what they need to be responsible and accountable for? Because I often recognize and notice that the people that need to be at the table are never at the table. Only those people who have those, who think they have the intellect to tell us what we need to do to be able to address an issue. But when you bring the people who are intimate in these situations, how many times have you all brought them to the table?
Every time, John. I know exactly what you're talking about, John. I mean, we've been doing this long enough. We have kind of a theory of nothing about us without us. We have parents in that program. We have an entire youth section of that program to try to bring teenagers into it to address the same question to them. What could we do differently? What needs are out there? But we definitely bring parents from the system into that.
No, parents who are dealing with the issues.
That's
not
what I'm
just
saying.
parents.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. Parents from within the system, parents that are part of the system.
I'm always and forever hearing about all that we're doing to help people, but I never hear that we bring those persons who are in need or who we have recognized or we have designed or we have said that they are in need. They're ever at the table. And
no,
then I'm wondering, are we handpicking the people we bring to the table?
I hear you on the hand picking. I mean, all we can do is reach out to folks that we know and make that offer and try to get them to the table, but they're definitely a part of it. I mean, it's like I say, nothing about us without us. We have members of the community that are involved in the system, involved in these solution conversations. And I'm not saying it's a magic bullet. I'm just simply saying this is the thinking that we're doing now. We've got a pretty intense system of wraparound services for the kids that are in the system. But you're literally kind of the parable of babies coming down the river in a basket. We've got a great system to deliver these babies to safe homes and do whatever we need to do, but somebody's got to go upstream and figure out who's putting babies in baskets. We've got to get upriver and prevent it, because what I'm watching for 20 years is that poverty, and again, I'm not trying to sound blaming or ugly about this, but poverty will continue to produce kids that don't have the kind of supervision and values that they need. And they'll be, I mean, we've got 8, 9, 10-year-olds that are involved in burglary, let alone 12 and 13, and guns and selling guns all over the internet at 12 and 13.
Okay, and they're not doing that without having been taught what they're needing to do, being a part of this. What I will ask in the future, and when we have these future discussions, not even in this setting or venue, but in any venue, that I be extending an invitation, because I've not had one of those invitations except for the TNAC thing that you headed, Clay, when you were with the Parish. But I'd like to be a part of that, because I want to hear the conversations being had, because oftentimes we don't ask the right questions. We have answers, but we don't hear the right questions. And then for me, because I think I'm the only one on this venue or in this venue that I can see that is representative of the hue that houses many of those children. I want to hear those conversations from the people that says, here I am, and here I am. And what is it that I can do differently, or that I'm trying, I'm just not getting it? And like you said, John, when you went to get the additional help for someone other than, about the children with disabilities. Now, you could do it for the one that was bored, but the one that actually needed help, you had the longest or the hardest or the most barriers to be able to achieve what you were trying to get. See, if we got to keep running up our heads up against a brick wall, and we keep saying we need another program, we need to make the programs we got work. We don't need any new programs, because if we got programs on top of programs, it's almost like instituting new curriculums every time you turn around. You've not mastered any of them, but here's a new one. So
if you don't like the grading system, let's have new grading system.
Yeah, if it don't work, let's get something new. Well, wait a minute.
Don, thank you so much. I don't mean to shut off discussion, but we have people who we have commitments to. Clay, thank you so much.
Definitely.
Thank you, Clay.
Body of knowledge. I hope to extend this discussion at a future date. Thanks all for participating.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Clay.
feel free. I mean, anytime to invite me. And I know, John, you go to a ton of meetings. I see you everywhere at meetings. But yeah, any kind of community conversations to continue this, I'm happy to be a part of.
Thank you. Thank you. Now
Great,
I'm
thank you,
going to get
everybody.
ready because I got to go to city council meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.